Grad school is hard enough as it is, and it gets even more complicated if you don't know how funding works. So today we are talking about the most unknown funding problems so you can avoid them before it's too late. And the first huge unknown problem would be non-residential tuition. So in a past video, you've probably heard me talk about how if you work for a university, either as a TA or a GSR or some other academic student employee position, or if you have certain grants, you can get your tuition covered. But for the most part, that only applies to in-state tuition. Meaning if you are an out-of-state student or an international student or an undocumented student that can't present or prove that you have residency in the place that you are going to school, there is a portion of your tuition that is extra that is not being covered by your jobs or even possibly your grants or fellowships. This becomes particularly a problem if you are somebody who is trying to figure out how to pay for your grad school and you have these jobs or grants, but you're unaware of your non-residential tuition costs. Now, generally, there are ways to approach this. One of the most common ways of getting this cost handled usually doesn't work your first year, but can help your second, third, and the years that follow. And that is, you need to apply to get residency in the state that you are going to school. Now, if you're somebody who has access to the ability to move a year earlier or to establish residency in another way before you go to grad school, this would be a great way to petition for residency so you can get in-state tuition, and that will help absolve this issue. But if you are an out-of-state student, it takes an entire year to be able to establish residency. So for that reason, your first year, you may be responsible for non-resident tuition, and that often can be a lot of money. International students, however, oftentimes don't have the ability or the access to apply for residency because that implies a longer citizenship application and things like that. So for the second way that people usually handle this issue is by reaching out to their department or applying for supplemental grants from your university. This process isn't necessarily 100%, but generally if you reach out and ask, there may be extra monies within your department, or they may be able to guide you to the university at large to figure out how to support you to cover your non-resident tuition. This is a problem because there really aren't that many solutions. The first and the second are really your only options, and for most people that still leaves you vulnerable for your first year. So it's important to make sure that you're aware of what your non-resident tuition would cost if you were to go to a school outside of your residency, or if you're an international student, to make sure that that's something that you're prepared for, or it's a part of your funding conversation you have with your department or your university before you accept your funding package. Now, this next unknown funding problem can actually get a lot of people in trouble or caught up. And that's because grants have or can have a lot of restrictions. And what this means is oftentimes when you're applying for a fellowship or a grant application and you win that award, there are usually some limitations or regulations that are applied to that money to make sure you're using it in alignment with the mission of the people who are giving you the money. Now, generally, that's probably just making sure that your eligibility lines up with their expectations and that you followed all the rules during the application and that you meet their criteria. However, some other grants have some more restrictions that really can impact you and your financial well-being depending on your circumstances. One of the main ways that grants can be really restrictive and it can negatively impact you is that a lot of them have working limitations, meaning if you were to win their grant, they may not allow you to work to supplement your income. So if you won a $20,000 grant, but you need $35,000 to live successfully as a graduate student, and they say that you can't work, then you are technically $15,000 in the hole because of this restriction. Other grants have restrictions where you can only accept their grant and no other grants. Again, this may not be a problem if it's a large enough grant, but some grants may only be $22,000 and you may need $45,000 to pay for school and live life. So in this case, you may not be able to mix and match in a way that would help you, and you might have to accept multiple lesser prestigious grants or decide that you want this particular grant and figure out how to supplement your income in a different way. Now, with all this said, there are ways to address this, though it really is dependent on each one of your grants and your personal circumstances. So the moment that you win a grant, I would encourage you to go talk to your financial aid or your fellowships and grants department in your university, because more times than not, they have more institutional knowledge about these processes and how to work around these restrictions or expectations to help you maximize on the amount of money that you need to live and thrive successfully. Now, logically, it would be most useful for you to make a pros and cons list to help you decide on which grants or fellowships or monies would help you be in the best financial situation. But I will say there may be strategies that, again, may be brought up if you talk to your fellowship and grants office to help you navigate that. Some strategies that people implement to kind of work around this more broadly is that they may stagger their awards. So they may accept them at the same time, but create different starting dates so the award times don't overlap. And that might be a workaround that would help you. Other people may reach out to the awards committee themselves and petition based off of their extenuating circumstances to help make their situations more viable. If you are somebody that knows that you have these specific needs or desires or need financial support, you may be able to reach out to them to ask for an exemption to let you work or an exemption to let you select another grant. So it's important to also be in communication with your award committee or the people that are administering or distributing your award so you have a good idea of what the regulations are and if there's any opportunities for exceptions. And then the third thing that a lot of people do is they kind of do things under the table. This action is technically against the rules, meaning they may work or accept smaller grants kind of under the table. Now, this may or may not be ethical. That's not a part of this conversation that I'm having, but rather giving you strategies that a lot of people are implementing to make sure they are successful in grad school. And I'm not going to really comment on whether it's morally right or ethical or any of those things because I personally think it's unethical to put graduate students in situations where they are financially unstable and are fighting against poverty or other types of financial instabilities that just impact their well-being, their mental health, and also their family health. However, it is information that I want to share with you that is something that people do just in case you may need that as a resource to survive. Another major unknown funding problem that I didn't know about until I got to grad school is that there are circumstances where you may be expected to pay your grant back. Now, I don't think this happens particularly in large numbers, but I will say generally, if you are awarded a grant with expectations and you don't make those expectations, or if you're awarded a grant and they give you a lump sum of money to do a specific project or thing, and that's not completed, like your dissertation or graduating, then when the grant deadline is done, they may ask for a review, and in turn, if it's incomplete, they may ask for their money back. So it's also important to know that even though we get grant money, we have to be fulfilling the mission or the objective of the grant. A lot of grants won't check, honestly, but some will. And you never want to be in a situation where you've won a lump sum of money to do a task, fail at completing the task, and then be in more financial debt because you've spent all the grant money during the year when you weren't completing the project. This also doesn't mean that if you don't do it, you will always have to pay it back. In fact, and a lot of times when graduate students are doing dissertation year fellowships and their dissertation is going beyond what the deadline is, they oftentimes just reach out to the granting committee or the administrative team of the fellowship people to communicate what the problem is and ask for guidance, support, or advice. And generally, there are leeway options or loopholes to help you maintain your money, keep your money while progressing throughout your dissertation or throughout the project. The most important thing is not to hide your lack of progress, but rather to be in good communication with the people that are overseeing your money or your project to make sure that you're still in alignment with the mission or the objectives of the grant so you don't end up having to pay it back later. Which leads to paying a different group of people. Yes, an unknown funding problem is that grants generally are taxable. Of course, this is dependent on every individual circumstances, what your grant is, what your financial need is, what your income is, and all these other things. And you have to consult, or you should consult, a financial expert or a tax expert, which I am not. So this is just me giving you information, but not any legal or financial advice. But generally, grants can be taxable, and you may owe the IRS money based off your grant money. So I would not spend every single penny or every single dime of your grant until you've had a conversation with a financial advisor, a tax professional, to help you make sure you're making the best decisions for you so you don't end up owing the IRS a lot of money in the end. But if you want to avoid these problems altogether, then you need to know what questions to ask, which is why you should watch this video next, where I share the best funding questions you need to ask your department so you can be as prepared as possible. If you found at least 2 things useful, hit that thumbs up. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.